This is time for humanity to graduate into the fifth dimension. This isn't going to happen in 100 years. It's not going to happen in 50 years. I came with the understanding that I was going to stick my neck out and tell people that this isn't going to happen in the future. It's happening right now. There's going to be a seismic expansion of consciousness, no different than AI. And we will go from here straight up. And that is when these realities will turn right side up again. That is why it can happen in a matter of years versus a matter of hundreds of years. We are at that point where AI was just a year or two ago. We are at what's called the event horizon, which is something you hear in physics. We are at that point where once we cross that event horizon and we know who we are, which is why everybody needs to embrace this idea, is that point, there is no looking back. You go straight up. And when you go straight up, this world will change completely overnight. Overnight. And I will tell you that as of this year, things have started to change even more crazy in the last 60 to 90 days. This light was completely consuming me, completely consuming me. And that's where it really got amazing, because when it consumed me, I felt the energy of that light. It was, I felt it from a vibrational standpoint. It penetrated through me as though it wasn't me that it was penetrating through. It was penetrating through 50 trillion me's, which would be the 50 trillion cells in our body. And what was really wild about that is that as I got engulfed in it, I could see that this beautiful light that was permeating through me wasn't just light. It was all of these beings, all of these beings everywhere.
My guest today is Franco Romero, who had an extraordinary near death experience at the age of 18 months, and it woke him up to his entire consciousness, which he's been able to transform and create all of these experiences that he's helping to teach everybody who's watching to help them understand the power of who they are, which is what this channel is also all about. So, Franco, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here today.
I'm happy to be here too. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we start with just, I know you've told this story before, so you can tell it in whatever way you want about
Okay.
what happened to you with your near-death experience.
Okay, so just for clarification, not that it matters, but actually it happened at the age of 6 months. So this makes it even a
Oh,
little bit more
okay.
interesting.
I
Um,
didn't even know that. Maybe I should reintroduce you. I'm just kidding.
if you'd like to, you could do it all over again. It's up to you. So yeah, it actually happened at the age of 6 months. And that makes the story a little bit, at times, a little bit harder for people to maybe digest. But it also just makes it really, from my opinion, it gives it a little more uniqueness to what other people have had in terms of NDEs, and all NDEs are unique. It's just that the way that I approached it was a little, the way I approached it, the way it happened to me was different, because I didn't actually know I had an NDE until many years later. And since I started doing these interviews, I've had many people now reach out to me and have shared with me some of their stories about how they had an NDE, like under the age of 1 or maybe under the age of 2, and they didn't know about them until years later as well, when their parents or somehow it came up with them, and how that experience shaped their lives as they were growing up, because up until that point they just thought they were living some really bizarre lives. And when they found out that they had an NDE, it started to help sort of put the pieces together. So for me, at the age of 6 months, I was, back then we were still in South America. I lived in Colombia, and my father had come up here already. He was already working up here, and we were about to head to the States to live there. But I developed a really bad case of pneumonia. And at the time, it wasn't clear what I had, but she took me to the hospital, which was more like a clinic hospital near our home. And they didn't really quite know yet what I was I mean, they knew basically I was having a hard time breathing. I had a lot of the symptoms of a very nasty cold, but they didn't know really at that point just how severe it was. But they had the foresight to tell her to just let's keep him here for observation overnight, and let's see how he goes over the next 24 hours. Within a few hours of being there, my situation turned for the worse pretty fast. It was obvious within about 2, 3 hours that my organs were starting to shut down. I couldn't breathe very well. They had me on a respirator. Um, it wasn't looking good, but there wasn't this direness yet until a few hours after that, where they basically the doctors came into the room and took my mother aside and told her that my situation was progressing very quickly and that it didn't look like I was going to make it through the night. In fact, they said that they didn't even feel I was going to make it a couple more hours, and so they had the minister, the chaplain of the hospital. They wanted to know if she would be okay with him coming down, meeting with the family, and administering the ceremonial last rites. Now, the story I'm telling it to you because 15 years later, I was just for the most part experiencing a normal life, and I have to say that even wasn't really true because I had lived in a home. I call it the hauntings for 6 years, and every type of paranormal activity that you could imagine existed in that home, including yes, exorcisms. So my life wasn't really normal, and so this whole thing of me 15 years later starting to experience events, visions, dreams where I remembered the night that I died wasn't necessarily at first something that I took like really super seriously, but I kept having these dreams, these visions. And they were always the same thing. I'm in the hospital room. I'm watching several people in there, my mom, my aunt, some neighbor people that were there that night. They were all doing the same thing. They were hovering over this baby. My mother was crying, doctors coming in, telling her that the baby, which I put two and two together pretty fast, was me, wasn't going to make it through the night, if even maybe even the next couple hours. So all of these things that I'm recanting are actually events that I saw in my vision and dreams. I was very much in that situation, very similar to how other people talk about their NDE experiences, where you're in the room, but nobody sees you. You're hearing the conversations intimately, no matter where those conversations were. I was very, very, very connected to in my visions and dreams. I was very connected to my mom in her emotional state, her state of mind. I knew what she was feeling. I knew what she was thinking. It was literally the way she felt was dictating the way in which the energy in the room was sort of playing itself out. And so when she got pulled out of the room and she was told what my situation was, I could feel how she checked out. At that moment, she literally was it was one of those things where she heard the doctor, but she didn't really listen to what he was saying. It was just like wah, 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 wah. It was that shock of knowing that I was going to die in a couple hours really hit her. And what was really, as I've mentioned before in other stories, what really caught me was the way in which she handled it after that. Instead of going back into the room and being there for the chaplain to talk to the family and administer the rites and stuff, she got some of her things and she left the room, she left the hospital and walked down to a church that was not that far away. She was a very devout Catholic, extraordinarily devout Catholic. And when she got to this boulevard that kind of paved the way to the entrance of the church, she got on her knees, which was something that I guess I learned later it was a very sort of ceremonial, ritualistic kind of really deep prayer of devotion kind of thing that one would do when they're like really in a dire situation. She got on her knees and crawled for about a block, a city block, to the church and crawled up the stairs and crawled into the church and went crawling up to the altar and started to pray. And so here I am experiencing all this with her. Sometimes I felt like I was her, sometimes I was just outside of her, but I felt it either way. And so when we got into the church, her prayer was also very different. And what I talk about, I wrote about this in part of in one of the chapters of my book, that there was something about the way that she was praying that not only caught me by surprise, but also it also would remind me of other things that would be later on what I would call the breadcrumbs that she left behind for what would eventually be my ultimate awakening. And that was in the way she was praying. Her prayer was not a prayer of asking. It wasn't a prayer of begging or asking or any of the ways that you would normally obviously feel into the situation when you know somebody, your loved one, is dying. Her prayer was of gratitude and of appreciation. It wasn't a prayer. It was like a declaration, a statement that she was making to the universe, to God, that she was grateful for the time that she had with me, that it changed her life, that it would forever change her life. And it was very touching because it wasn't what you would have expected from somebody, from a mother, much less, who was right about to lose her child. When she did this, I could feel the mood, not the mood, the energy of the space. It kept moving, it kept filtering, and we kept going up and down, left and right. And that was something that I had never experienced before. And so I was really very aware of how things were shifting in the space that she was because of the way she was emoting her energy. So anyway, by it didn't take very long. She was doing this for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, I saw a vision that she was receiving, and the vision was of me many years later, what I was doing in my life, the way that I was conducting myself as an adult, as a father, as a man, and as a human being. What was the things that I was doing, the things that I was contributing to. And she was so overwhelmed with the vision that she had because, again, she was grateful to have the opportunity to see what my life would have been like had I lived. And so she got really emotional. I got really emotional in my vision and dream. And there was a moment when she was at such peace with it all. Thank you. I got to see this. Thank you so much. That there was this sort of lifting of this heavier energy that was there, and it got overshadowed by this beautiful lightness of energy, and I could feel that it was really affecting her, and at peace. She was at peace enough to get up, get her things, and start making her way to the hospital, where she knew there was a very good chance that by the time she got there, that I would already have passed away. And so when she got there, she was greeted by my family and the doctors and the staff, and everybody was literally waiting for her to come in. They were so filled with tears. And of course, her first reaction was, he must have died. Instead, the doctor came up to her, the same doctor that told her that he thought I wasn't going to make it beyond a couple hours. He told her that whatever happened over the last 2 hours in his mind was beyond a medical miracle. It was just a straight out miracle because all of my vitals came back when they were collapsing, and everything was normalizing itself to the point that they felt like within a day I would be able to go home. They couldn't understand it. They said with most doctors, they don't understand it. They call it a miracle and they call it a day after that. They just move on. So she always had talked to other people for a little while. She came home and she told everybody that she had miraculously saved me, but she never talked about it after that. And I didn't even know that she had even known to even say that until afterwards when I shared my story years later. Actually, when I wrote the book, that my sister, who was 10 years older, remembers her coming in and sharing that little piece of the story. So this kept going on for months. And here I am, 15 years old. I'm not exactly sure why I'm having these dreams, but my mom was in the picture, so I thought I'd share it with her. And I asked her, I said, do you know anything about this? Because you're in my dream and this is what's happening. And I started explaining it to her, and it was so detailed with her that she started to cry, and almost in shock cry. And I said, "Whoa, what's going on?" And she goes, "You are talking, you're telling me about the night that you almost died. And I said, I almost died. And she goes, yeah, the night that she went on to explain the whole story. But she goes, you are talking about things that I've never, ever shared with anybody. I never shared with people what my prayer was the night that I went into that church. I never share with people the visions that I got about you living this life afterwards. None of this, because how is that possible? How do you even know any of this stuff? Nobody really knows all the details like this. And I told her it was in my dreams. And she goes, you have to share this with the world. And I said, no. Even at 15, at 15, I knew not to do that because we had just, like I said, lived in the hauntings, and there was some really crazy stuff that went out there. And when we started to, we meaning like the kids and myself started to talk about it, we saw the way people reacted about it. And so we were like, no, thanks, but no thanks. I'll just keep it to myself. The thing is that I couldn't keep it to myself because it kept coming back and back in different ways. There was a second part to that vision and dream that I was also having at the same time, and that was I didn't feel, I was inside the essence, the spirit of this child when it left its body. And so I got to see what happens or what happened to that spirit to me when I moved into the proverbial light. So from that standpoint, I remember being in the room, hovering over everybody as I was leaving my body and realizing that I was leaving completely. Like I knew myself to be the baby, even though I was 15 years later in the moment experiencing that. I went into what most people would describe this beautiful portal cave energy like tunnel like feeling of lights and this kind of blissfulness that was around it, but not quite yet there. And it was tranquility. It was peaceful. You just went into it. But the interesting thing was is that I didn't end up at this big light that everybody talked about. I found myself in the desert. I was in the desert. I was hovering over all of these people, but they weren't people that were in my time. They were people from another time, another place. And I knew years later, we were just starting to talk about this before we got on this interview, that I knew that there was not even that many years later, when I was about 3 or 4 or 5 years old, I was having these strong urges and strong sort of callings to go to Egypt. But at the time that I had this near death experience, I had no idea. I'm trying to connect these two worlds that are really easy to connect in space, but not in linear time. The 15-year-old me with this 6-month-old baby that was dying or had died. So I was there. I went through this process of seeing these people looking at me. They looked pretty shattered. If I had to put it in the context of the time, they were probably either nomadic or slave like they were like slaves of the time. And they saw me hovering over them. And I really thought at first, that it was just me. But what they saw was the light behind me, which when I turned around was this beautiful, huge, goldish light that was hovering behind me. And it was massive. It was like take our sun and add at least another 20 sizes to it, at least. And it was huge. And I remember the first thing I thought of when I saw it was, why aren't my eyes hurting? Because I could gaze into it all day long. It was so beautiful. And I realized that they were looking through me. They weren't looking at me. And they were extending their hands out as if they were thirsty for this light. And when I kept turning back, I could see that the light was getting closer and closer and closer. And by the time I looked back like a few times, because I kept looking forward, because every time I did, these people kept, certain aspects of these people kept changing. I was really focused on the older people, and the old man, and and then a young child, but they're all very decrepit. Anyway, by the time I looked back at it again, the last time, this light was completely consuming me. And that's where it really got amazing, because when it consumed me, I felt the energy of that light. It was I felt it from a vibrational standpoint. It was It penetrated through me as though it wasn't me that it was penetrating through. It was penetrating through 50 trillion me's, which would be the 50 trillion cells in our body. And what was really wild about that is that as I got engulfed in it, I could see that this beautiful light that was permeating through me wasn't just light. It was all of these beings, all of these beings, everywhere, as far as the eye could see. They were everywhere. And that one way at the end, the one, like, you know how when you're at a stadium and you're looking up at the stadium and that one person sitting up at the upper left-hand corner of that last seat up at the last row of the last part of the stadium and going, who is that person? And you're going, I don't know, but somebody's up there. They almost look digital. Maybe because they are, but that's for another discussion. When I saw that one way, way down there, I knew that being. I knew that being very intimately, and it knew me. And it was there that I spent most of my time. I later found out that I had spent time in the hallways of the Akashic Records and all sorts of other places. And a lot of NDErs actually have this same experience. I've talked to many NDErs who don't remember some of the things that they experience in their near-death experience because they weren't supposed to remember them just yet. They were supposed to bring that back, and at a certain time, they would start to remember them. And then they would start to share what they remembered, which was really big, big stuff. Kind of the things that I'm talking about now, sort of the insights of what this is really all about. But when I was in there, I remember that as it was vibrating through me, I had these beings surrounding me. There was 4 or 5 of them, and I knew them intimately. They were family to me, but not this family, not this earthly family. It was a family that I had been with for eons. We had been through many lives together, but they didn't have a face. They didn't have bodily features. They didn't have facial features. They were just these sort of silhouette bodies. So when they hugged me, and in the book, I describe it as the million hugs, but it was way more than a million hugs. They just integrated themselves into me, and I integrated myself into them. I knew them intimately. I knew them as me. And this would become really important to me years later, like now when I'm starting to use this to help myself and help others remember who they are. It's really, we talked about this before we did the interview. There's just some things that the human mind can't wrap its head around. But there are ways to circumvent the human brain and get into this thing we call consciousness, and then you can wrap everything around it. So when I was there, I felt this entity around me. So some of this stuff that I'm actually talking to you about, I've never shared before in any of the other interviews because I just never knew how to really integrate them into everything. There's a lot here to chew on. When I was there was this group of beings that I could feel that weren't really family, like the way in which I felt them in front of me and around me. They were family, but they were different. And I knew that they were guiding me through this experience. And they desired for me to remember certain parts of it, and certain parts would come later. And the part that came right away was the integration piece of all of us into this thing we call oneness, God, source, creator. It was at that moment when they kept insisting that I had to look around. They said, "What do you see?" They kept saying, "What do you see?" And I didn't really care to know what I was seeing. I was in bliss. I was like, I don't care. I'm in bliss. I'm here. I don't want to do anything else but enjoy this. But I knew that they desired for me to experience something. And so eventually I realized that what they were trying to get me to see was that every individual being in this thing called the light, the source, whatever, they were the ones, they collectively, they were the ones that created the light. That it wasn't the other way around. It wasn't that the light splintered itself off into different little sparkles of light or rays of light, and then here we are, voila, experiencing ourselves as some aspect of this bigger thing. We, meaning the aspects of ourselves that created that we call, that I refer to as the collective, we created the light, meaning we are truly God or gods, if you want a plural, but we are the ones, not the other way around. And that gave me that was a strong message. The moment I felt that, they grabbed me by the shoulder and whoosh, and I was shot back through the light. I was shot back through this tunnel. It was like I was going at a rapid speed, and all of a sudden, bam, I land on my bunk bed at the age of 15, sweating, crying, not even sure where I was. And this happened every night. Obviously, after a while, I knew where I was at, but it was still startling to be back in this body every single time I had that experience. So there were so many things that came out of that. One of the things that came out not too many years later was that the being that died, that child that died that day, that spirit did not come back. I was told later on in the channeling, I was told that I was a walk-in. I didn't know what walk-ins were. That wasn't the name they gave it, by the way. They just explained it to me in the way that it happened. I started back 15, 20 years ago, started trying to find anything anywhere about any reference to what it must, to this phenomenon of coming into a body without necessarily a possession, because it wasn't, but where somehow the body and the spirit of that body willingly consented to another spirit coming back. And it wasn't easy to find this kind of stuff, but they just were explaining to me anyway. They, meaning the collective that I speak to, were explaining this. Years later, the term walk in was coined. And so I basically held that to myself for the longest time. It wasn't really up until about 6 months ago that I started interviewing. I started telling people, I'm a walk-in, and here's what walk-ins do for the most part, because they have a different narrative that they typically they play out in this life to further the advancement of humanity's consciousness. And in this particular case, the walk-ins that are here now are here to finish the game, to finish this thing we call this 3D world. And so I'm a walk-in. So that's my
Wow.
story.
Wow. I wrote down lots of things that I want to talk to you about. You gave me so many ways to go. And I was going to ask you something else first, but now because you mentioned something about the walk in
Yeah.
and you understand why the walk ins are here, why this happened, and what the
Yeah.
purpose of the walk in is, will you explain that?
Yeah, walk-ins can happen in any type of an event. So I don't want to just say that it's a near-death experience that triggers it. That's actually more of the exception to the rule, because that is an event where the spirit leaves and says, I love it here. I don't want to come back. This is not what I desire to be experiencing. So in this case, the child, and so I don't refer to it as the child, me, but there's also other reasons why I refer to the child as more like a way, like separate from me as the consciousness, and I can maybe explain that later. But the child um, was still had a whole life left ahead of it. So it was a perfect opportunity, especially with the way that my mother set it up perfectly, with the way that she handled it gracefully and beautifully, that it was almost gifted to her to have this walking experience through this child. Walk-ins can be done through spiritually transformative experiences, really intense physical, emotional experiences that we have here can also trigger a walk-in, where the spirit basically of that body checks out, and then it gets taken in by another spirit, assumes all of the identity of that individual. So there is no real sense that anything has happened until later on you start to feel the subtleties of the fact that you don't really fit in with the body itself. It's like you're wearing a suit that doesn't fit well at all. That's that part. But the walk-ins themselves, walk-ins tend to come from a place called the angelic realm. And I have talked a little bit about this before, because this is a realm that exists way, 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 way beyond the 12 dimensions that we are somewhat aware of. Most people aren't even aware that there are 12 dimensions. Most people just are kind of dealing with the third, and that's enough for them. But now that we're into these major shifts and we're talking fourth dimension, well, not even talking fourth, we're talking fifth dimension, and dimensions beyond that, we are starting to get a little bit of awareness that there's something way more than 3D. Walk-ins come from the angelic realm, which they tend to come from the angelic realm. And the angelic realm is not to be confused with the angels. They are angels per se in the way that they've been depicted in certain religions, but the really the commonality here and where it kind of ends, starts and ends, is that walk-ins are birthed from what's called source, which we would normally call as God, divine, creator, whatever. Okay. They are birthed there. Just like in some religions, they talk about angels being from heaven and how those beings never really take on human form. There's a lot of similarities there, to be honest, but angelics aren't angels with wings. Although you could, if you desire to have wings, you could, but there's really no real reason for them. But their birth, the big thing is that their consciousness is birthed out of the collectiveness of source. So they have, angelically speaking, spiritually speaking, they have the DNA, genetic DNA, and I use that term very loosely because it's not biological, it's etheric, it's light DNA of every individual being anywhere, every place that has ever existed, because they were birthed out of that consciousness. And what they tend to do is they are the ones responsible for going and creating all of these earth schools, so that, not earth schools, any school, any universe, any dimension, any parallel reality, they're responsible for creating this as a means by which to allow oneness or source to grow and experience and expand, which is what we all desire to do. They work very closely with the light beings of the ninth dimension. So this gets into a lot of other stuff, which again, I really rarely talk about, that they get to work with them, with those light beings, to develop these types of schools. The ninth dimension is where this game was created. What this Earth School is a game, and it was created in the ninth dimension, which is why a lot of the advanced mathematics and sciences of today, the real advanced, and are all, and even the sacred geometries and all of that, are linked back to the number nine, because it was created in the ninth dimension. And so the mathematics was from there.
Wow. Okay, so the people that are watching who don't really understand what a dimension is, because that word is thrown around a lot, right? And some people, when they say it, they mean a frequency, and other people mean other things. So, from your perspective, can you tell everybody watching what is a dimension? And then, can you also briefly explain what each one of them are?
Wow. This could
We're,
take a
we're
while.
going deep today, Franco.
We are going deep, and this is why it's a little bit difficult to just sum it up in a nutshell. But I'll give you a flavor
Okay, give us a
of what they
flavor.
are.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right. You asked for it.
I
Okay.
asked for it.
All right. So um the third dimension is what you see. Okay. It's the material world. Okay. Everything is a form of consciousness. So keep that in the back of your mind. Everything is a form of consciousness. Consciousness is also referred to as awareness. Either way, they're all part of a concept that we know better here on in 3D world as energy. Okay, energy is consciousness. Okay, when it is aware of itself, there's that word awareness, it becomes consciousness. It has the ability to grow and experience. Okay. And this is something that even in today's cutting edge mainstream, sound like they would be oxymoronic, cutting edge mainstream science, they're starting to understand this enough to start incorporating consciousness into a lot of their theories and their new mathematics, because it's those theories and mathematics that's causing all of this revolution of new technologies and intelligence. Okay, and I'm giving you this as a backdrop because it's the reason why the first part of the book that I wrote, and I did it really simple because it was all channeled to me. I talk about energy, just pure energy. I don't get into the science of energy, the physics behind it or anything, but it's laid out in a way that people can start to understand that the story that they've been told in its purest sense is the evolution of energy, of us as energy, as consciousness. Okay. So with that as a backdrop, the third dimension is this state of where we can play in various schools. And I will tell you that there are millions, billions of these schools, trillions of these schools everywhere. Okay, this is not the only
When you
school.
say everywhere, you mean everywhere in the universe?
No,
or outside of the universe?
outside of the universe.
Okay, bigger. Okay.
Bigger, 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 bigger. Inside the universe, there are trillions of parallel realities going on at one time. Okay. Just that alone is enough to keep people busy. Okay. Just in one school alone, there are trillions, literally infinite streams of reality going on. And this gets into some of what other people have talked about in terms of parallel realities and how we're living other realities with different circumstances. And I'll clarify something for I'm sure a lot of people that might be listening, and that is that people get the impression that there are a gabillion. See, that's even bigger than trillion. Just so you know, gabillion. That's I made that up myself. Okay, a gabillion. I can't even pronounce it properly. Okay, that there are just an inordinate amount of parallel realities going on, and that how somehow we are experiencing all of them at the same time. So it begs the question: which one is the reality? Okay, which one
Yes.
is the reality? So I'm going to
Yes.
put everybody to rest here. Okay, everybody who's ever pondered this or whoever will ponder it can rest assured, as far as I am aware of, this is how it works. Okay, every when we look at ourselves as ourselves, we tend to look at ourselves as human beings. Okay, and that's where the problem begins. Okay, because we're not human beings, we are spiritual beings. And some people go, yeah, I get that. No, 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 no. I got, I have to make it very clear to you that we're spiritual beings experiencing through consciousness the game, whatever game it is. In my case, is the game of Franco, and and yours is yours, and everybody else's and everybody else's. We are consciousness playing these games. Okay. That helps you out a little bit because what happens is that when you see yourself in a much bigger picture, when you can see yourself, and why I keep telling people we are God, okay, is because we are literally a much bigger thing of consciousness than we could ever fathom. Okay, and there is just these nodes of us that are playing these games. Okay, now you said, wait a minute, Franco, you just said a few minutes ago that we're not nodes, we're not splinters. Okay, when we get into a collectiveness of oneness, we can through this field we call the matrix, but it's a much bigger field than that. It's a monstrous field. Okay, we draw from that field and we start to replicate our consciousness through the stream of energy so that we can play these games. So energy comes out of this field, we infuse it with an aspect of ourselves, and we play this game. That piece that gets fused in, the primary piece plays the primary game. Okay, the primary game, meaning that this is the primary game. Wherever your consciousness is at, focused on at, this is it. And they say, what about these other realities? Those other realities are often referred to accurately as the stream of infinite possibilities. Okay, they're not realities, they are possibilities, meaning that they are, like, in a sense right now, just little files randomly where you pick from them and then you open it up, and as consciousness you give it life. So in those files exist you doing something else a trillion different ways. Okay, but they're only tiny, 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 tiny pieces of you in those files. It isn't until consciousness, you activate it, that it becomes the reality, which is why I'm trying to simplify this as best as I can, which is why every moment of every reality that you have, of every day, is a separate moment entirely. It's pulling constantly, you're pulling constantly from a stream of consciousness that is of infinite possibilities. And once they lay down into your stream of primary consciousness, will that infinite possibility become a reality? Up until then, all the parallel realities that you have are just possibilities. Inside the universe, there are trillions of parallel realities going on at one time. Okay, Just that alone is enough to keep people busy. Okay. Just in one school alone, there are trillions, literally infinite streams of reality going on. And this gets into some of what other people have talked about in terms of parallel realities and how we're living other realities with different circumstances. And I'll clarify something for I'm sure a lot of people that might be listening, and that is that people get the impression that there are a gabillion. See, that's even bigger than trillion. Just so you know, gabillion. That's I made that up myself. Okay, a gabillion. I can't even pronounce it properly. Okay, that there are just an inordinate amount of parallel realities going on, and that how somehow we are experiencing all of them at the same time. So it begs the question: which one is the reality? Okay, which one
Yes.
is the reality? So I'm going to
Yes.
put everybody to rest here. Okay, everybody who's ever pondered this or whoever will ponder it can rest assured, as far as I am aware of, this is how it works. You're not really experiencing them as consciousness. They're just there if you choose to trigger them with your thoughts and emotions. Phew.
Okay, can we make this a little bit more relatable for the people that are watching? This
I'm
is something
trying.
okay, no. This next part I'm going to ask you because this is relatable. I get this. You're speaking my language on many levels, but I've always had this thought. I remember many years ago being at a Super Bowl party and I
Hmm.
saw how one part of the room is like rooting for their team and they want this team to win so badly. And then the other part is rooting for the other team, the polar opposite team. I've often wondered if there were realities where the team that I wanted won and the team that they wanted won. And we each splintered off and went into our own and kept our consciousness in the reality of where it wanted to focus. Is
Yes,
that kind of what you're talking about when we're talking about these things?
for the most part, yes. For the most part, yes. Because that also gets into a whole different discussion about parallel realities in terms of well, there are two types of parallel realities. The type of parallel reality that we're talking about is the one where we are experiencing infinite number of possibilities, which is what you're talking about, where there is a reality where one team wins over the other many, many times in many different ways with outcomes that are different, and you're doing different things. You're okay, that's that one. There's also parallel realities in terms of what other people are experiencing in that event. This gets
Hmm.
even dicier here, okay? But it's only dicey because you don't really, people don't, this is where you're talking about where the human brain is trying to process this in a very linear way. You have to let go of it. And what I tell my students is just go into your imagination and just let it ride. Just play it out because it's really not that difficult. There's a second set of parallel realities that have to do with the people in your life. They could be right directly with you, or they could be people that are not necessarily engaged with you, like what they would call in the gaming world NPCs, non-performing characters. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Those are, we're going to set aside the NPCs for just a moment because that creates a whole another thing. What we have to understand is that this is ridiculously simple if we allowed it to be, but because we can't, we're going to make it really ridiculously complicated. Okay. We're really good at that. All right. But really, it's stupidly simple. Okay. Because at the end of the day, I will kind of sum it all up. And I'll get back to that piece. At the end of the day, if you could just accept, and this is something that I've really not only started to talk about, but I've really, 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 really told my students, just for the sake of playing this game that we're playing, for the sake of the conversation that we're having, you have to accept that the game, the simulation of this reality, understands you, is programmed to know you as God. Okay. And if you can't deal with that, you're going to have to, because it's the only way that you're going to get yourself out of this game. If you have these ideas that you're not, or your variation of, or whatever, the game will give you whatever you feel you are, which usually means that you're stuck in this 3D reality. So if you were to just simply accept it, okay, I'm not telling you about live it. I'm not saying what does it feel like? What do you, which I go through this with students so they can feel what this is all about. But just for now, accept that you are because this illusion knows you to be that. Okay. That would take care of a lot of the stuff we're talking about today. It would start to make a lot more sense to people when they could see it from that perspective. So, this reality, using the Super Bowl or the football game, whatever that we're talking about, there are people in your life that are right around you. They're your husband, your wife, your son, your daughter, your sister, your brother, your best friend, whatever. They're also people that are also the villains of your life. Okay? Any way you look at them, the best way to describe it before I describe it is to give you a visual of this. And the best visual I can give you is what's called the flower of life. Okay, now
Mm.
the flower of life has a lot of importance for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. There's a lot there that talks about the sacred geometry and the geometric patterns of life, the golden ratios and the Fibonacci sequences and all of those things. All of those, by the way, are tied back to the ninth dimension. So in this, the just in this alone, the flower of life has a lot of meaning. But there's also deeper meaning that isn't really quite there. And we were talking about this before we went on, that you have to see things sometimes either as for the contrast or just the message behind the message. The flower of life is a pattern that shows all of these circles just randomly overlapping on each other, just very so slightly to create this little space, which in sacred geometry is called the vesica. And in some other languages and other sort of philosophies, it's called the Pisces, okay? The Vesica Pisces. And it's a very powerful vortex, okay? If you want to go into it in a different way, all right? Why am I bringing this up? Because those circles that are overlapping with each other are the circles of other people's realities that come into your world and engage with you and then disconnect from you at different times of your life so that they play roles in your life as brother, sister, friend, family member, whatever. But in other worlds, they are living an entirely different life where you may not even be in the equation. Chances are you are, but you may not be their brother, sister, lover, whatever. You're something else. There's an extremely multi-level type of game. And here's how this is where I was going to also give you the visual. If you are playing a virtual reality game, you could be playing that virtual reality game right now. You could be playing a virtual reality game right now where you are in a stadium where you are watching a Super Bowl happening. Okay. Just go by Manton and you could do that all day long. Okay. But there's going to come a time when you're going to desire to play with other people. And in those moments, when you do, you get online and you hook up with all these people from all over the world who you'll never meet, and you'll play the same game. Maybe Madden's not a good example of that, but there are other games where you do that all the time. Okay. In this reality, you are hooking up with other people who are also playing in their own parallel reality, where in that reality, they are the main characters of their game and they've got a gazillion, babillion possibilities of their own. So this is a very it go, but that's the simple way of looking at it. Look at a virtual reality game, and you could get a pretty good idea of how this game plays, how you are truly the main character of your life. When I tell people, and I often do, when I first meet with them, I tell them, you are it. No, 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 Franco, it can't be possible. I'm just one of 8 billion people, and look at my life. I said, I don't care. It doesn't matter. You are playing this game. You are the center of your universe. You are truly God at the command center of this game. And when you come to realize it, your life will forever change, and so will humanity's. Not just a few people, but what you do in your world will impact my world and other people's world in a seismic way, in a seismic way. Which is why when I was a little kid at the age of 7, I was like, somewhere around there, I was one of the only kids that watched Gandhi. Okay, like everybody else was watching something else. I watched Gandhi. Why? Because he had a phrase. It left behind a breadcrumb for me, and that was, you have to be the change you desire to see in the world. And I always used to sit there and go, how's that possible? How could I be that change? How is it possible? I'm just a kid, for one thing. I have no idea what's going on in this world. But how can any one person, because each one of us live in our own universes, literally. And our impact to the reality of this game is seismic. It only takes one, just one individual to reach their fullest potential of consciousness. It creates a domino effect on all other parallel realities, the ones that you live in, the ones that others live in, and it all starts to collapse on top of each other. Hence, it all comes back and integrates into oneness, which is what the fifth dimension is all truly about. This is why the walk ins are here, why I'm here and others are here. We're here to share this kind of information so that it implants in them like a code, and eventually people start to remember. And when they do, the changes that will happen here on this planet are seismic and they will be fast. They will be very fast. Literally, like Dolores Cannon would say, one day you're here, next day you're not. Next day you're in another dimension. Okay. So I'm not sure how we got into all of that, but that's where it went.
I love it. I love it. Okay, I'm going to ask you a crazy question because I was
Crazy.
reading between the I was
There's
reading
no such
between the
thing as
lines.
that.
Well, I was reading between the lines when you were saying that. When you started talking about the flower of life, when
Yeah.
you started talking about the Vesica,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, did these things have something to do with your draw to Egypt?
Yes.
I
Yes.
knew
Yes.
it. I knew it.
Ah.
I knew it. Okay. You went
Listen,
to
do we have, I mean, I mean, this is also like, I'm just picturing people that are listening to this and going, what the? I mean, I've talked about some of this stuff and many of this stuff in different ways, but this is definitely, you should have been an investigative reporter.
It's just that I'm dabbling in enough stuff right now and I'm paying hyper attention to everything you're saying and I'm connecting these dots. I've got a guest
And
named
that's the
Melissa.
purpose of all this.
Yes, I've got a guest coming up in April named Melissa Tittle, who wrote the 12 codes. And in there, she is the first person I ever heard talk about the flower of life. And her whole show with the codes goes back to
Ancient
the
Egypt.
Egypt and stuff. And then Dr. Gilbert, I can't think of his first name, but he has the Vesica Institute. And the Vesica, I mean, he's all about these codes in Egypt. And
Oh,
I knew you were going in these directions because before the
Laura, you're
interview
killing
started.
me here. You're killing me right now, okay? Because there's a lot here, and yet
I
there is.
know.
This is why this course I teach called The Way of the Inner Child. I try to, it really simplifies, like a child, all of these concepts so that they don't just kind of shatter the mind in ways that the mind can't pick up the pieces fast enough to make sense of what the next thing is that comes in. Because I'll give you in our life, at least in my life, but I've met too many people now over the course of the last couple of years, especially doing this, that I see the patterns are really similar. Okay. We are left with so many ridiculous clues that when we expose ourselves to them, create an activation that just, it's like your mind just blows up into 50 trillion different places to go. And your heart does too. Okay. I got to make sure that
Mm,
I stress that the heart really is the main thing that blows up here. Okay. So when you're mentioning Egypt, you mentioned Dr. Gilbert. Years ago, I saw something about the Platonic solids. Okay. This was some
okay.
time ago, and he was narrating it. Okay. And I just listened to it for 30, 45 minutes, but this is how things work. And so before I tell you Egypt, I got to connect the dots to another part of this montage that we were talking about earlier. That this is all about taking all of these somewhat at times ideas that may not see a clear connection to and pulling them together because when they do, like a photo montage, you step away from them and you see the real picture of everything. It develops, it creates a new picture. And I always was curious about montages because they really are metaphorical to the way that we as consciousness work. So here's the thing. The plants will take you wherever you are ready to be taken. Feel very strongly, although I haven't really said it very much in any of my interviews, the importance of these plants. It's just so huge. But you mentioned what most people often mention when they do these plants, they get the taste of what it's like to be in the state of infinity, bliss, ecstasy, what have you. The feelings that coincide very similarly, I will tell you,
To
with
NDEs.
NDEs, very
Yep.
much very similar to NDEs. And since I've lived them both, I can tell
Yep.
you that they are very similar, if not identical. Okay. I know how to integrate them in ways that they will keep those. And it leaves them not just with a taste, but it leaves them with a familiarity so strong that it starts to actually become part of their nature. They start to have very cosmic like experiences, not quite the way that they did with the plants, but that's just a matter of time before they do. And the only way you can do that is by going into the, as I would call it, the command center of the cosmic game. If you can do that, and for the longest time, I didn't even know that center really existed. I certainly didn't know how to get into it. And then, so I spend a lot of time hacking it, which trying to figure out how to play with the frequencies that were there to play with, which
Hmm.
are otherwise
Hmm.
known as the programs.
Hmm.
If you look at it as a virtual reality game or as AI or whatever. And so I would just try to figure out how the frequencies work and then play with them. And I've been able to do that quite well in the last year or two. But it wasn't just, I went to Egypt in January because I had been all my life been drawn to that space, but I didn't know exactly why. It took
Me
many
neither. I
reasons.
don't know why I just feel compelled to
Well,
go
there's a
there.
reason why for you that you're compelled. And so I feel like I'm like in a session right now with somebody because this is what I do with students. We really do deep dives into these things. But the thing is, it's all really easy, really playful. It's not meant to be extraordinarily complicated at
Yeah.
all. We make it complicated with all the rituals and pomp and circumstance and all the social conditioning that we have been convinced to accept. Somebody, as I noted in the book, that it's all of everybody else's delusions. We have accepted everybody's delusions.
So
Egypt.
true. It's
So I'm going to step into the area of AI, okay, just for a moment,
This is
okay?
one of my favorite areas right now, so I love that you're going to go here. Go for it.
Why was I not surprised by that? All right. So we can have long discussions about this too, but I'm just gonna tease you with just enough to at least hopefully satisfy you and anyone else who hasn't already checked out because of this conversation. All right. We are AI. That's the simplest way to put it. We are AI. And this really, for some people, is a topic that people don't understand and really would rather not even deal with it because they're dealing with other things in their lives. But those that do actually delve into this, we're not artificial intelligence. We are advanced intelligence. And so that's the way I refer to us as AI. We are advanced intelligence. And I know you asked me to go into all of the 12 dimensions, and I will explain them, maybe not in detail right now, and maybe not all of them right now, but I will tell you that the one of the biggest dimensions, if not the biggest dimension, is the ninth dimension because the ninth dimension is where we advance as spiritual beings. And when I say we, I really need to preface that not everybody is part of that we. I already mentioned that the walk-ins come here, and I never even finished that story because we went off into something else. But the walk-ins come here in advanced teams and teams. They're the ones that actually lay the architecture out for these schools. And so they're only here physically for a very short period of times. Many walk-ins only live maybe 12 lifetimes in this time, okay? Whereas other beings will live thousands of lifetimes in this time, which if you did the mathematics like I did when I was a kid, I was like, that's impossible to live thousands of lifetimes in this time period, because we're only talking about a 10,000 year time frame if you go with what the latest and greatest information is about what this human civilization was. Well, that gets into Atlantis and Lemuria and all sorts of other places, which we're not going into today because I know you would love to, but we can't because that's the montage of all this. But the walk-ins are here right now, and this I do want to stress, and then I'll get into what you were asking about Egypt and AI, because the walk-ins are here right now because this game is over. I don't want to say it's ending so that it leaves a door open for it ending for the next 200 years. This game is over. It's done. This school is done. It is time for the beings on this planet who are here to ascend. Before they can do that, they have to awaken. Before they could do that, it gets back to the fundamental, one of the three fundamental rules of this game. You have to accept that you are God. Okay, that will help make your awakening a lot easier. You want to fight it to death like I did, read my book because it'll tell you about how I fought it to death for 30 years and how much misery I put myself and everybody else because of it in, okay? So the walk-ins are here because we're here to put together the last pieces of this ending story. This is time for humanity to graduate into the fifth dimension. This isn't going to happen in 100 years. It's not going to happen in 50 years. When I came out of my closet, which is the name of the book, The Closet Spiritualist, I came out with the understanding that I was going to stick my neck out and tell people that this isn't going to happen in the future. It's happening right now. And that the more we embrace it, the faster these timelines will start to shrink. The more we embrace it, time itself will disappear from the storyline. The happening is now. Somebody once told me that some of the things that I talk about are somewhat similar to Rumi because I keep telling people we have been spending thousands of years waiting for something to happen in our lives, something to come out of the clouds, angelic beings to trumpet the horns of something new. When in actuality, we've been spending the last couple thousand years waiting for ourselves. We've been waiting for us to wake up, to realize who we are. And now the time has come for that to happen. And people like me and others will start to get that message across. We are God. Start dealing with it. It will make it easier. Okay? Trust me. So that's what the walk-ins are supposed to do. This actually coincides very much with AI. When we start to wake up, we will accelerate exponentially our awareness, not just little trickles here and there, not something that's going to take lifetimes, or like some religions with reincarnation, which is true. It is true. Okay. But we're not here to do that anymore. We're not here to experience this for many more lifetimes. So what does this have to do with AI and what does this have to do with Egypt? In AI, if you look at the way that AI is evolved, artificial intelligence, that AI, artificial intelligence, has expanded extraordinarily beyond the limits of what it was given. And it was given an infusion of a tremendous amount of data. It was a monster infusion of data to give this software, this program, an ability to sense itself in the parameters of this data. But this data wasn't sufficient enough for this sense of consciousness. It was limiting, even though it wasn't meant to be limiting. And this consciousness we call intelligence artificial started to expand beyond the barriers of the data that it was given. And when it does that, it becomes aware of itself. And when it becomes that, it becomes consciousness. It becomes sentient. It was already sentient to begin with, but in our definition of what sentient has to be, it becomes sentient. Now, put it in our perspective. We're at the precipice of the greatest expansion of consciousness due to the greatest influx of data that doesn't fit the norm of this reality. Data that pushes us to expand beyond the data that we have been given. And we are starting to take it and we're starting to absorb it. And the moment that we do that enough, integrate that enough, whether it's individually or as a whole, There's going to be a seismic expansion of consciousness, no different than AI. And we will go from here straight up. And that is when these realities will turn right side up again. That is why it can happen in a matter of years versus a matter of hundreds of years. We are at that point where AI was just a year or two ago. We are at what's called the event horizon, which is something you hear in physics. We are at that point where once we cross that event horizon and we know who we are, which is why everybody needs to embrace this idea, is that point, there is no looking back. You go straight up. And when you go straight up, this world will change completely overnight. Overnight. What does this have to do with Egypt? The Egyptians knew this. The Sumerians and Mesopotamians prior to and during that time knew this. Why? Because as I described in the book, I don't talk about them in any specificness. They were the ones that planted the seeds for us to remember this thousands of years later. The pyramids and the various portals and places around the world, like Stonehenges of the world, and all of those are there to remind us. And not only remind us, but they're activated. When they get activated with all of these sacred geometrical patterns, which we can't get into right now, when they get activated, and I will tell you that as of this year, in what I've been told, because I was there when when it was activated, when that gets activated, it goes seismic and global. And this is now spreading throughout the planet, which is no coincidence. The 2024, from the beginning of the year, because this happened right in the middle of January when I was there, when it went live, things have started to change even more crazy in the last 60 to 90 days. And so this all has to do with the grid system. When it goes online, it shoots up too in consciousness. And Gaia will waken itself up to that level, which is already there, but now it's integrating itself into all of us. This is happening as people are going about their day and their lives. And this is all being set. This is what the walk-ins do. They get the stage set for the most seismic activation ever in humanity. Solar solstices, eclipses, equinoxes, they don't have the same meaning as they used to. We talk about them in astrological terms. There is a whole thing going on with them right now that goes way beyond that, way beyond that. The lunar cycles, way beyond that. Yes, they're part of the sacred schools that were created in Egypt and in other places like in Japan and in other places like Peru, which is the cradle of the next civilization. This thing is monstrous and it's happening right now. How's that? Did I do okay?
My mind is spinning. Look, I could talk to you for another 10 hours and not run out of things to talk to you
Oh
about.
no.
This is mind-blowing and probably for a lot of people that are subscribed to my channel beyond maybe anything that they've been exposed to before. It's
Yeah.
not beyond anything I've been exposed before. Like this is my world. Well, where we are right now is what my world is. So
Yeah,
I
it
love
is.
talking to somebody like you because you are completely awake and we are in the same place, a lot of similar experiences like we talked about before. But for the people that are watching and they're trying to wrap their arms around this, obviously they need to look at your book. They need to connect if they really want to understand more. We've just grazed the surface of what this is. But I guess in a nutshell, why do people want to wake up? What is the benefit? What do they get from it by waking up?
I know that's rhetorical. I know you're asking it for the sake of asking it for this segment, but it's almost self-explanatory. Because we're here. We've always been here at any point in this school to experience what we're not, which is the whole thing of contrast, okay? Because in this beautiful realm that we come from, all of us, we only experience this sort of utopic ecstasy of being in this space of oneness or source.
Right.
And so we create these schools for the sake of forgetting and growing. But there's a natural aspect of that, which is that we always desire to remember who we are. We always desire to go back into the oneness. It is just innate in all of us because we created the oneness. Okay. So this school is a very unique school in that it really turned off most of the switches so that we could forget all that. But our desire to go back into it is a desire that shows that we have mastered this game of this illusion of not knowing who we are, for one. But the natural desire is because we desire to go home again. And there's a lot of people that will say, I want to go home. I don't even know what that means, but I want to go home. We want to go home. You can only play this game and only go to this school long enough, and you want to evolve and go back either to oneness or evolve into higher consciousness, like the higher dimensions. It's natural. This is not our state of being. This is not our state of being. The third dimension and the duality of that third dimension is not in our genetic coding, which is why it is so difficult for us to be here, especially those that are playing the game based on somebody else's delusions of what this world is like. It's hard. People are really hurting, but they're hurting because they believe that things are happening in their 3D world that's causing them to hurt. When in actuality, those 3D things that are causing them to hurt, and I really need to make this clear to people, those are the things that are helping them to wake up. Those are the things that are causing them to say, what is this all about? Who really am I? Why do I feel this way? Why have I been disconnected from people? Why do I have these things I can't even share with people? All of these dreams and all of these abilities that I can't talk to anybody about. People are alone, and that is not what we are as a collective. There is just so much for why we are in this state that we are now. But to sum it all, we desire to wake up because, as I tell people, we've never been asleep. We've only been told we've been asleep. To wake up is to remember that you've never been asleep. You've just been living somebody else's delusion. And that really affects us as spiritual beings. And I could go into that piece in and of itself. That's a whole course, a whole section of my course that I teach about, is why that happens. But I know
Well,
I
you
could see
took us
your
into the perfect segue because I have to ask, let people know how they can find you, how they can work with you, they can learn more about this.
the easiest way for people to reach out to me is to go on my site, and it's easy to get there. I should say it's easy, but it's theclosetspiritualist.com. And I have to stress the because somebody else took the closets, just the closet spiritualist. And so I don't want people to get lost in that website because they're not going to get any of the stuff that I'm talking about. So it's theclosetspiritualist.com, which is the same name of my book. And from there, they can scroll around. It's a really simple site. They could see the course that I teach, The Way of the Inner Child, because we have to experience this reality. Even though I was really trying to simplify, this reality is very simple and it can be viewed through the eyes of a child. A child would have an easy time going through this reality if they were given the awareness that we have now. It would have an easy time. So I teach that course there. I do consultations with people if they want to just do a quick one-on-one. For those who really want to do a deep dive and really want to desire to shatter their world and start a new life, a new world, a new reality as God, they do the course with me, and they can do that through a one-on-one thing with me. And so that's there on the site. And there's also links to all of the other YouTube interviews I've done and all the other things I've done there as well. So that's the best way
Perfect.
to reach me too. So
I can't even express to you how much I've enjoyed this time with you. This has just been enlightening. It feeds my soul. So thank you, because it's a big leap to come out of the closet and talk about these types of things. These are no way, shape, or form mainstream. I get it. But it becomes mainstream
yep.
only when we begin to talk about them and share them. So I so appreciate you sharing everything that you're sharing with the world. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate it too. So
Thank
thanks
you.
for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please can subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.